So let's talk about Vietnam's last royal family, the Nguyen dynasty. This is a story about power, ambition, and how history turns on very specific moments. Before they were emperors, the Nguyen were powerful lords, like super important governors, in the southern part of Vietnam. For centuries, they were in a tug-of-war for control with another family, the Trinh lords, in the north. This rivalry split the country for a very long time. It wasn't one unified Vietnam back then, but two powerful regions constantly competing. The Nguyen lords were really good at building their power base, making smart alliances, and controlling the very profitable trade routes in the south, which made them incredibly wealthy and influential. The man who changed everything was Nguyen An. He was a survivor. His family was almost completely wiped out by their rivals in what was called the Tay Son Rebellion, but Nguyen An was determined and resourceful. He spent years on the run, gathering supporters and fighting to reclaim what he believed was his family's destiny. He was a master strategist, someone who knew that to win a big fight, you sometimes need a little help from your friends or even your future enemies. This quest wasn't just about personal revenge. It was about uniting a fractured country under a single, powerful ruler for the first time in centuries. After decades of conflict, Nguyen An finally defeated the Tay Son rebels and conquered the north. In 1802, he declared himself Emperor Gia Long, and bam, the Nguyen dynasty was officially born. This was a huge deal. He established his capital in the city of Hue, which he turned into a magnificent imperial center modeled after China's Forbidden City. Gia Long's rise to power marked the end of a long period of civil war and the beginning of a unified Vietnam that stretched from the border of China all the way down to the Gulf of Thailand, creating the S-shaped country we recognize on a map today. So, what made the Nguyen family so powerful? It was a combination of things. They had military smarts for sure, but they were also great administrators. They built a strong government based on Confucian principles, which created a very organized system of laws, taxes, and civil servants. This brought stability to the country. They also had help. During his fight for power, Gia Long got some assistance from French adventurers and missionaries. This early relationship with France would seem like a good idea at the time, but as we'll see, it planted the seeds for some major problems down the road. This mix of local strength and foreign help gave them the edge they needed to rule. Under the early Nguyen emperors, Vietnam saw a lot of big changes. Emperor Gia Long and his successors, like Minh Mong, worked hard to create a strong, centralized state. They built roads, canals, and a postal system to connect the vast country. This was super important because it meant messages, goods, and soldiers could move much more quickly than before. They also standardized the currency and created a national legal code. The goal was to make Vietnam a unified and powerful kingdom, able to stand on its own. The emperors in Hue were at the very top, and their decisions affected everyone. For the average person, life was mostly about farming. The vast majority of Vietnamese people were rice farmers, living in small villages. Their lives followed the seasons of planting and harvesting. The village was the center of everything: family, tradition, and religion. People paid taxes to the emperor, usually in the form of rice, and young men could be called to serve in the army or to work on big government projects like building the massive walls of the imperial citadel in Hue. Life was hard work, but the stability brought by the dynasty meant fewer wars tearing through their villages, at least for a while. The Nguyen emperors were also big patrons of art and culture. They sponsored the creation of beautiful poetry, intricate wood carvings, and elegant ceramics. The architecture from this period is especially famous. The imperial city in Hue is the best example, a sprawling complex of palaces, temples, and gardens where the royal family lived and worked. This cultural flourishing was a way for the dynasty to show its legitimacy and power. It was a golden age for Vietnamese traditional arts, creating a distinct cultural identity that the emperors wanted to promote across their newly unified kingdom, setting a standard for beauty and sophistication. But it wasn't all peace and prosperity. The Nguyen emperors were very conservative. They were deeply influenced by Confucianism from China and were suspicious of outside ideas, especially from the West. Emperor Minh Mang, for example, was famously isolationist. He heavily restricted foreign trade and was very hostile towards Christian missionaries, who he saw as a threat to traditional Vietnamese values and social order. This policy of looking inward would protect Vietnamese culture for a time, but it also meant Vietnam was not modernizing as quickly as other parts of the world, which would soon become a major vulnerability. The Nguyen dynasty's suspicion of the West, particularly of France, wasn't without reason. French Catholic missionaries had been active in Vietnam for a while, and the emperors saw them as a disruptive force, undermining the Confucian social order. Emperors like Minh Mang and Tu Duc began persecuting Christians, sometimes executing missionaries and local converts. This gave the French government the perfect excuse to get more involved. They claimed they needed to protect their citizens and the rights of Christians. But really, France, like other European powers at the time, was looking for colonies to expand its empire, secure resources, and increase its global prestige. The real turning point came in the mid-19th century. Using the persecution of missionaries as a pretext, France launched a naval attack on the port of Da Nang in 1858. The Vietnamese military, with its older weapons and traditional tactics, was no match for the modern French warships and guns. Over the next few decades, the French military steadily expanded its control. They fought a series of campaigns, capturing key cities and strategic areas, slowly chipping away at Vietnamese sovereignty. The Nguyen court in Hue was forced to sign a series of unequal treaties, giving away territory and power bit by bit. By 1887, France had completed its conquest. It took over all of Vietnam and combined it with Cambodia and Laos to create a new colony called French Indochina. The Nguyen emperors were not removed from power completely, but they became puppets. They were allowed to keep their fancy titles and live in their palaces in Hue, but they had no real authority. The true rulers of the country were the French governors general. The emperor became a symbolic figurehead, a tool used by the French to give their colonial rule a sense of legitimacy in the eyes of the Vietnamese people. For ordinary Vietnamese people, life under French colonialism was a dramatic and often brutal change. The French restructured the economy to benefit themselves, establishing huge plantations for rubber, coffee, and rice, all for export to France. This forced many farmers off their land to become low-paid laborers. The French also imposed heavy taxes and a state monopoly on salt, alcohol, and opium, which made them rich while impoverishing many Vietnamese. While the French built some infrastructure like roads and railways, it was mainly to help them control the country and extract its resources more efficiently, not to help the local population. The 20th century brought new ideas and new challenges to Vietnam, and the Nguyen dynasty, in its weakened state, couldn't keep up. The French colonial system created a lot of anger and resentment, which fueled the rise of Vietnamese nationalism. People started dreaming of an independent Vietnam, free from foreign control. Movements and political parties began to form, inspired by different ideologies. Some were monarchists who wanted to restore the emperor's real power, but others were Republicans or communists who wanted to get rid of the monarchy altogether and create a completely new kind of government. The final act for the Nguyen dynasty came during World War II. In 1945, Japan, which had occupied Vietnam during the war, was defeated. This created a power vacuum. A powerful communist and nationalist leader named Ho Chi Minh saw his chance. His organization, the Viet Minh, launched a massive uprising known as the August Revolution. They quickly took control of Hanoi and other major cities. The last emperor, Bao Dai, who had been collaborating with the Japanese and before them, the French, found himself with no allies and no popular support. The world was changing and the age of emperors was over. On August 25, 1945, in a simple ceremony in Hue, Emperor Bao Dai officially abdicated the throne. He handed over the imperial seal and sword, symbols of his power, to the representatives of the new provisional government led by Ho Chi Minh. In his abdication speech, he famously stated that he would rather be a citizen of a free country than the emperor of an enslaved one. This moment officially marked the end of the Nguyen dynasty and 1,000 years of monarchy in Vietnam. It was a quiet and peaceful end to a dynasty that had begun with a long and bloody war. After the fall of the dynasty, Vietnam's story became even more complicated. Ho Chi Minh declared the Independent Democratic Republic of Vietnam, but France was not willing to give up its colony so easily. This led to the First Indochina War between the Viet Minh and the French. After the French were defeated in 1954, Vietnam was divided into a communist north and an anti-communist south. This division eventually led to the Vietnam War, or the American War as it's known in Vietnam, a devastating conflict that lasted for 2 more decades. The journey from a unified empire under the Nguyen to a unified socialist republic was long, painful, and transformative.